They claimed that he was excessively idealistic, but I didn't mind because I was so young and infatuated that I abandoned everything to be with. Please don't misinterpret me, Henry. As I look back, I wonder whether they were correct. Has always been a good spouse, and we have created a loving life together. Laughter and 3 amazing children. Our children have grown up and are now married. Families of their own are dispersed throughout the nation, leaving Henry and I alone in our old home, which appears to for 2 individuals who formerly flourished on excitement and adventure. The quiet has gotten louder over time. We still love one another, but the fire that once burned has shifted for some reason. The brightness between us has occasionally diminished and been replaced with a constant, dependable warmth. I find myself missing the fire and spark we once shared, which now seems like a faraway memory. Were typical issues that all couples deal with after decades of dating until this night. Like every other evening, it began with me in the kitchen preparing Henry's favorite stew, which smelled of herbs and garlic. Filled the air as I stirred the pot, thinking about our kids. Pondered whether, like me, Emily, our oldest, would come for Christmas this year. I dried my hands on a dish towel before answering the doorbell as I was ready to call Henry for supper. Michael, Henry's younger brother Michael, was standing on the porch. Michael was unpredictable and full of erratic behavior, whereas Henry was consistent and dependable. Charm, his rich, husky voice always carried a message, and his grin could light up a room. Even at 30, he possessed a magnetic energy that attracted others to him, with a tinge of mischief. Michael flashed as he replied, "What are you doing here, Vanessa?" I was shocked. I smiled and moved aside when he flashed that boyish smile. "Is that how you greet your favorite brother-in-law?" Michael dusted the snow off his coat so he could enter before it became too cold. I figured I'd swing by since I was in town for work and hoped I wasn't taking him to the living room, where Henry will be, I replied, not at all intruding. Henry walked in Michael's face as he slid into the couch. "Happy to see you." His eyes brightened at seeing his brother, and the 2 of them embraced, their laughing filling the room like a breath of fresh air. Fresh air. We spent the evening telling stories and sipping wine while remembering the good old days. After supper, Michael reclined in his chair, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fully alive. A light-hearted twinkle in his eye. "Vanessa, do you recall when I showed you how to dance?" I chuckled and shook my head. "I can't recall how many times you trod on my toes, but I wasn't that awful." He objected to the insult. "Henry, come back to me, Henry." You laughed. "We're awful, Mike, but you persisted, so I'll give you that." Michael smiled and turned to face me, saying, "Come on, Vanessa." Before I could argue, "Let's see whether I've improved." He stood and stretched his eye, hesitated, looking at Henry, but he smiled and waved us away. Michael guided me to the middle of the room. His hand warm against, he led me in a slow, swaying dance while the music played, and his touch was solid, but delicate. His movements were unexpectedly elegant, and for a brief while, it seemed as though we were the only 2 individuals on the planet with whom I could sense his focused gaze on me and uncompromising, and it made me shudder. As the song came to a conclusion, I withdrew. "Michael," I forced a laugh as I added, "you've definitely improved." My heart was beating. Grinned, but his gaze was on me for too long. I turned to Henry, who was observing us with an unreadable look, and for the remainder of the night, I couldn't get rid of the impression that later that night, as I lay in bed next to someone, I noticed something had changed, but I couldn't quite place it. Henry talked in a steady, low voice as he was falling asleep. I turned to face him and said, "Vanessa, may I ask you something?" He paused as though he was picking his words carefully. "Do you ever miss the thrill of the question we used to have?" Surprised me occasionally, so I confessed, but I assumed it was typical, and he agreed. With a distant expression in his eyes, "I want you to be happy, Vanessa." "I am genuinely happy." Henry sighed and reached for my hand as I said, "Happy?" Even though the words were hollow. "I've been considering the possibility that we ought to try something new." "Restore the spark?" I asked, my heart racing, and he glanced at me. "I want you to spend the night with my brother," he said with a solemn yet loving expression, and the words lingered in the air. And unsaid, 1,000 questions rolled around in my head, tumbling over one another. I thought he was kidding, but Henry's eyes told me he was serious. "Why would you suggest something like that?" I murmured to Henry, "I don't understand." I glanced at him as he added, "I want you to feel alive again because I love you." He was caught between interest and incredulity. The concept was ridiculous and scandalous even at that point. I couldn't help but wonder what it would entail for our marriage. With Henry's comments bearing down on me, I understood that this was just the start of a tale. I never believed that I would be a part of a story that would first alter everything. I wanted to completely reject the offer since it sounded so ridiculous, but while I remained there, holding the covers to my chest, I couldn't ignore the glimmer of an inquisitive feeling deep within me. My heart raced with a mixture of panic and hunger that I hadn't experienced in years. Was this crazy or an opportunity to revive something fueled by remorse and excitement? Henry exited the room after a brief conversation, his footsteps fading as he spoke of something that had long been dormant in me. I took deep breaths to try to relax myself as I descended the steps, but to no avail. Could help me anticipate what would happen next. Henry came back a few minutes later, and this when he wasn't by himself. Michael was standing next to him. I sat up, holding the sheets were fastened to my chest like a shield to protect my eyes. My thoughts were racing between the two of them, trying to comprehend the truth of what was happening. Michael stepped. He was not wearing his coat, so he reluctantly stuffed his hand into his pockets. No longer than a simple shirt that draped over his wide shoulders, his hair was a little disheveled, and he looked at me, and our eyes locked, and once more, his presence seemed to flow through the space like an electric current. His eyes were gentle and warm, but they also had a darker quality that caused my breath to catch in my throat since his expression had changed from a smile to one of seriousness. Thoughtful and so incredibly gorgeous that I had to turn aside as my cheeks began to heat up. Vanessa. Henry spoke in a soothing, calm tone before approaching and taking a seat on the edge. Was staring at me with a gaze I couldn't quite place. Are you all right? Nodded, but my heart's quick pounding revealed my uneasiness. Are you, Henry? Certain that this is what you truly want? Yes, he stated firmly, yet Vanessa, your tone was kind. I noticed how you and Michael danced tonight. I've been thinking that perhaps this is what you need, what we need, based on the way you looked at each other. I blinked, struggling. Henry reached for my hand and touched it in order to understand what you were talking about. Supporting me for years. We've had a comfy routine, but we've lost Vanessa. I can see that spark in your eyes. I know you've been craving something more. Something thrilling that I couldn't ignore. I sensed the gap widening between us and the lack of the fervor that once characterized our connection. But why Michael? I muttered in a tremulous voice. Henry faintly grinned and looked to his brother, whom I trust since I know he. I looked to Michael, who was still standing, and I knew he would treat you the way you deserve to be treated. His gaze was riveted on me as he approached the threshold, moving slowly and purposeful, as though to give me time to comprehend Vanessa. Michael's words. His tone was low. And I don't want to cause you any discomfort, so if this isn't what you want, just let me know and I'll go. Gulped hard, my eyes darting between them, and I felt like screaming to let them both know that this was absurd. But another aspect of myself that I buried beneath years of habit, and I was interested in responsibility, so I turned back to Henry. Are you truly comfortable with? He nodded, saying, I know I can't give you what you want, Vanessa, but I want you to be happy. You don't need it anymore. Perhaps Michael can break something with the vulnerability in his voice. I knew deep down that this was about all of us, Michael, not just about me. Approached and stood at the edge, his eyes never leaving mine, and I sensed he extended his fingers, brushed against my hand, and pulled in a way I couldn't articulate. Vanessa. I felt a sudden surge of warmth as he whispered in a voice like velvet, you have a choice. I paused for a second before nodding my head. I muttered, pumping okay. And Henry stood, soothing me with his palm. Henry gave me a small smile and said, it's okay. Before I stepped back and my eyes widened. Vanessa believed me, but when he turned, he chose to sit down in a chair near the bed rather than go away. Steadily observing us both, my heart pounding, my gaze flitting between Henry and Michael, I sensed a mixture of nervousness and curiosity thickening the tension in the room. Unquestionable heat, Henry, I said, holding the covers firmly to my what are you doing chest? He sat in the chair, his face composed yet focused. Want to stay? He added plainly. I want to watch you happy, Vanessa. You let go in order to rediscover the aspect of yourself that you had long suppressed. I glanced at Michael, who was observing me closely, and he extended his fingers as his words sent a chill down my spine. He whispered softly, leaning against me, are you okay with this? I hesitated. My heart was racing, and there was an energy in the room that I couldn't quite identify. I nodded, my voice just above a whisper. and I finally explained. Yes, the silence in the Michael sat on the edge of the loud chamber, moving slowly and deliberately. He reached for my hand once more, his fingers warm and hard against mine, and I watched him, my breath quickening. "You're," he continued, "amazing, Vanessa." In a quiet but intense voice that made me flush. Michael's hold on the sheets tightened as he leaned in and met my gaze. He said, "You don't need to worry. I'll take care of you." His words sent a chill down my spine as he carefully reached up and brushed. He gently, almost reverently, moved a strand of hair away from my face, and Michael leaned in, his lips hovering just above me as I felt my defenses start to fail. He whispered, scarcely raising his voice above a whisper. "Vanessa, inches from mine. Tell me to if this isn't what you want. Stop." I closed my eyes and my heart was racing. I worried he might hear it loudly, so I inclined my head rather than yanking away. Head in his direction, reducing the distance between us, our lips meeting, and everything seems to disintegrate all about me. His initial kiss was gentle and tentative, as if he was giving me a chance to reconsider, but once I spoke and leaned in, his touch turned into Michael's hand moved to my waist, drawing me in as he became more assertive and demanding. I felt a fire burn inside of me as the kiss grew deeper. A desire I had in every movement and touch was electrifying, sending waves of pleasure that lasted for years. As the evening wore on, Michael's touch was delicate and everything Henry had said it would be, but intense, reverent, and completely engrossing. For the first time in decades, I lost myself in Michael's warmth and felt genuinely wanted and alive. He spoke my name as if it were a prayer, and as the hours went by, I came to understand something I hadn't realized, that this wasn't merely about reigniting passion, but about finding my true self again, the lady I was before routine and life. Henry shifted in his chair, dulling her sharpness, and the sound briefly drew me in. He met my lips as soon as I looked at him, my lips tingling from Michael's kiss. Henry murmured softly, "I want you," with a gentle and reassuring face. The remainder of my hesitancy vanished when I turned to feel this Vanessa's words. Returned to Michael, whose hand slid to my shoulders as he watched me with such passion that my heart raced. His gaze wandered over me, taking me in, and I sensed his hard yet kind touch, a mixture of excitement and vulnerability behind his eyes. "You're beautiful," he added. Remarked, his hands moving slowly as he explored the curvature, his voice full of intensity. On my shoulders the collarbones line. Each touch was intentional and communicating. He leaned in again and planted a kiss on my lips, sending sparks of heat through me. Was more pressing, and his hands moved down my back, drawing me in till I sensed Henry's presence in the room as we were close together. But rather than making me uncomfortable, it increased the excitement. Every kiss and every touch felt even more intense knowing he was there to witness it. Michael's lips left my mouth in a line of forbidden intensity. His hands traced all over my arms and sides, kissing me down my neck. His lips reached a sensitive spot on my waist as he slid gently, enjoying every inch of me, area directly below my ear, and I released a gentle gasp as my fingers began to tingle in his hair. "Michael." I trembled as I spoke, and his hand moved down to explore the bend of my hips. He drew me in with a smooth, leisurely motion. I had not had such a passionate, reverent touch in years. I looked at Henry once more and saw that his eyes were fixed on us like we were something valuable to be treasured. Despite his placid demeanor, he gave me a heated look that reflected mine. Even as I felt myself drifting into the whirlwind of Michael's touch, I was grounded by his slight nod. His lips came back to mine as his hands moved over my body, learning every curve and contour. My hands automatically moved to slide over his lips as his kiss became more intense and demanding. Vanessa's shirt fabric allows him to feel the warmth of his skin against his chest. His hands moved once more as he whispered against my lips, his voice full of longing. He touched every part of me, kindling a fire that grew hotter with he kissed me and tasted every time, saving me in a way that made my Henry's whole body shook, but he said nothing, his presence a constant comfort. Michael's touch was everything I had been craving, gentle yet passionate. As I gave myself over to it, respectful but completely engrossing, I felt alive as I hadn't in years. My senses were sharpened, and every kiss and touch sent waves of ecstasy through me. His hands kept searching his lips, finding mine with every kiss. More intense than the previous time, I felt his movements and breath against my flesh. becoming more methodical and demanding, and every second seemed to drag on forever. However, I didn't want Michael's touch, kiss, and presence to stop. Everything I was unaware I required, and Henry watched his as the night wore on. I lost myself in Michael's warmth and display of love and understanding. I sensed a connection with him as he said my name, as if it were the most valuable word in the world. I believed I had lost my passion forever, yet even as I gave up to the I was momentarily unable to stop wondering what this meant for Michael and me, Henry. What would happen tomorrow? Would we be able to return to how things were, or had we gone too far? Undone, the scene seemed to be frozen in time, and Michael's face was illuminated by the bedside lamp's soft glow. His dark, desire-filled gaze traveled over me in gentle shadows, but I was unable to rip my eyes from him, the intensity of the moment enslaving me, but Henry continued to be the steadying force in the corner of my vision. Michael's hand glided up my arm, his touch purposeful yet exhilarating at the same time, and softly ran his fingers along my collarbone, grazing my collarbone with his thumb. I trembled when I felt the sensation of my breath catching in my skin. Throat. "You're so gorgeous," Michael whispered in a hoarse voice. I was struck by words that ignited something deep inside his other. He reached up to hold my face in his warm, steady hand and leaned in closer. He muttered against my lips, his lips grazing mine in a feathery kiss that calmed my racing heart. "Allow me to look after you." My hand shook as I grabbed for him, rubbing the fabric of his shirt. I paused, then carefully unbuttoned it by sliding my hands upward. My fingers caressed his chest, solid and warm, one button at a time, and Michael allowed me to explore, his eyes never leaving mine as though he were relishing every moment, and I felt a rush of excitement. At this point, he undid his shirt and shrugged it off, allowing it to drop down. My gaze followed the contours of his chest and the firmness in his shoulders to the floor. He leaned forward, his lips meeting mine, and his body appeared to emanate warmth and vitality. His hands moved to my sides and slid along the curvature, more forceful than before, of my waist. His gentle yet powerful touch drew me in, and the warmth between us was unquestionably. Henry's fire grew stronger with each kiss and touch. I stared at his cheeks as the chair creaked quietly, reminding me of his presence. His calm gaze as he watched us closely caused my breath to heat unevenly, filled with an unidentified substance. There was simply rage and no envy. Henry murmured softly, "You're doing beautifully," with a gentle passion as though he were savoring the moment with us. His calm and comforting comments gave me the strength to shove the last of it away. Of uncertainty, I looked back at Michael, who was observing me with a mixture of lust and patience. He extended his hand over my shoulders and reached for me once more. "Vanessa," Michael said, "you're amazing." The length of my arms. I've wanted his revelation for so long gave me a chill that was both exhilarating and fearsomely. His mouth met mine once more, and this time there was no hesitancy. Michael's hands moved as he explored my body with a tenderness that made my heart hurt. The kiss was deep and engulfing, his touch igniting every nerve ending as he traced the slope of my hips downward. His mouth traced a series of kisses down the length of my neck and along my jawline. One gave me a rush of pleasure as I felt his breath on my skin. As his hands continued to explore, his fingers brushed against something warm and alluring. He traced the contour of my body from my ribs to my waist. He spoke softly, taking his time as though savoring each moment. Against my ear, causing my heart to race with a mixture of excitement and vulnerability. I could feel his hands on my thighs, their solid, steady touch coursing through me. He drew me in, and as I looked at Henry once more, my breath caught. He had his hands on his knees, his gaze fixed on them, and he was bending forward a little, focused on us, and his look had a subdued intensity that combined love and Henry heard my shaking voice as I whispered a need that felt my chest constrict, and he met my he said, "I'm here, Vanessa," with gentle, understanding eyes. "Gently, you're doing fantastically well and you're secure." I turned back to Michael. His hands explored my lips once again, and the kiss was intense and engulfing. He touched every part of my body with a hunger that made my heart race, following the curvature of my spine and gliding over my hips, looking reverently at every part of me, leaving me speechless. Michael raised his head and his gaze as I whispered something that was hardly audible. Catching mine, he replied quietly, "Tell me what you need, Vanessa. I'm here for you." Unaware that I had been suppressing my emotions, His words caused something inside of me to burst, and I reached for him. I muttered, "I need you," as my palm moved across his shoulders and pulled him in. Michael's response was a breath-stealing kiss, and as he shifted, his hands moved to my waist, lifting me a little. As I got closer, I could feel his warmth and strength, and I melted against his body. Time seemed to float by as we moved together, answering his every touch. With their bodies perfectly aligned, every kiss, touch, and murmured word was a Henry remained a constant reminder of our connection, which felt both fresh and incredibly familiar. Presence, his love and support are clear in every look, and his gaze is unshakable. Vanessa, Henry whispered, "You're amazing, and I appreciate every word of encouragement." His remarks gave the moment a more intimate quality and served as a reminder that passion was only one aspect of this. Other aspects were love, trust, and rediscovering what it meant to genuinely connected. I lost myself in Michael in the rhythm as the evening wore on. Every moment felt like a discovery because of the intensity of his touch and the depth of his kiss. When we eventually separated, we were out of breath in the room because I had rediscovered a part of myself that I had thought I had lost. Was quiet save for our ragged breathing, and my heart was pounding. And yet, having Michael by my side gave me a deep sense of peace and completion. His arm was wrapped around my waist, drawing me in as his chest rose and fell rhythmically. His lips touched my temple in a gentle, caring motion, as though he couldn't bear the idea of letting go just yet. That filled my heart with joy. It was truly remarkable. He whispered in a hushed, respectful voice. I turned to him and felt the steady beat as I delicately ran my fingers over his chest. Of his heart beneath my fingers, I muttered, my voice full of before I could continue. I noticed that Henry had gotten closer to me. He bent down, his eyes full of a profound affection, his presence comforting and warm. He kissed my forehead without saying anything, and it nearly made me gasp. He lingered there for a while before turning to face me. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered softly, his voice full of enthusiasm. I was so moved by the depth of his affection that I blinked back tears. Henry put his arms around me and pulled me into a tight embrace of acceptance. For a brief moment I felt protected and loved, encased in his warmth and steady. When he withdrew his hand, the cadence of his heartbeat calmed the raging tempest of emotions inside of me. His fingertip wiped away a tear from my face that I didn't notice had dropped. He assured me that you would always be the three of us settled, Vanessa. I remained in the mattress as the night's tension and excitement gave way to a peaceful intimacy. Henry is on Michael's arm in the middle, with Michael on one side. Stayed stretched across me, his fingers idly making patterns on my flesh. With Henry's strong, reassuring touch on my other side, I felt cocooned. It was an odd but lovely mate connection in their warmth and love. Never imagined a connection that went beyond what was commonly understood. As I felt a wave of calm come over me as I listened to their slow, regular breathing, and my eyes grew heavy, and I allowed myself to fall asleep as the night's burden vanished and I melted into their warmth at the first dawn. Of dawn through the drapes, softly illuminating the space with a golden glow. Michael was still asleep as I gently woke up, feeling my body delightfully sore and my heart full. With my arms still protectively wrapped around me, I looked over and saw Henry awake. His voice whispered, "Good morning," as he sat next to me and smiled softly. "Good morning, Henry," I said softly and gently, my voice still heavy with sleep. He inquired, "How do you feel?" as he reached for my hand, his fingers entwining with mine. I gave it some thought. "I feel complete as the night's events replay in my head," I said at last. Like a Henry's smile widened as he bent down to plant a kiss on my lips, revealing a piece of me that I didn't even realize was gone. "Once more, I just ever wanted your forehead to feel alive, Vanessa. I firmly hold his hand and feel cherished in every way. I adore you. I suppose I've never loved you more," Henry replied in a voice full of emotion. "Than I do now, and I love you," he answered in a steady, full of conviction. "Vanessa, this just makes us stronger rather than changing us." Beside me, Michael moved, his eyes opening and a drowsy smile spreading. As he gazed at me, his hand moved to remove a lock of hair from my face. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I murmured, grinning back at him, but his eyes flickered. His voice was raspy from sleep. To Henry, and the two men briefly exchanged an unintelligible glance. There was no tension, no. Michael replied softly, his eyes lingering on his. Thank you for understanding and mutual respect, but only awkwardness. We're family, remarked Brother Henry, nodding warmly. Just the three of us. There was no need for words as we remained there for a little longer, enjoying the peaceful comfort of the morning. Unspoken feelings and a mutual understanding that transcended language filled the silence, and soon Michael stretched idly while sitting up. Then he continued, I should probably get going. His voice lacked intensity and I sat up as well, the covers tugging at my waist. I whispered gently, Don't rush. He grinned and reached out to cut my cheek. He assured me that he would return, and Michael leaned in to give me a long, passionate kiss. He looked at Henry and nodded silently in appreciation before getting up. After Michael went, Henry and I stayed behind as he packed his belongings and left. He drew me into his arms as we were in bed, the morning light bathing us in a warm glow. Are you okay? He asked, clutching me tight as though he never wanted to let go. I nodded, my head resting on his chest, and his voice was full of sincere concern. I admitted that I had no idea how much we needed this. Henry tightened his arms around me and kissed the top of my head, saying, As long as you're all that matters is that Vanessa is happy, and I knew then that we were in love. Was indestructible, a weapon that could endure everything. Yeah, the night had transformed us. However, it had also strengthened our bond and reminded us of how close we are to one another. As we were cradled in one another's arms, I experienced a deep sensation of thankfulness to Henry and Michael for our shared affection.